your children won't remember poverty as much if you love them and guide them in a certain way.
I love that. And one of the things that occurred to me when you said that is that you, as a parent, you're becoming Mahatma Gandhi said something. He said, "We must be the change we wish to see in the world."
EksAyn Anderson, welcome to the Bookaholic podcast.
Thank you, Deirdre. Appreciate you.
Yeah, glad to have you here. Now, before we dive into all that you have to offer us today, I have to ask you, where does the name EksAyn come from?
Yeah, well, it's great, and you say it EksAyn. It's kind of wild.
Well, EksAyn, excuse
Isn't
me.
that wild? Which makes it even a little bit more wild, right? Yeah, they say it's Swedish. And I got to tell you, Deirdre, I have been to Sweden, and there is not a single person in Sweden named EksAyn. So go figure.
Really?
There's not a single person. It's more of a family name. If you meet anybody else named EksAyn, they're probably in my family. My wife calls me X, and I always joke around. It's probably not a good thing if your wife calls you X, but I'm my wife's ex, and we're married.
Very cool, very funny. I went to school with a young man named Xavier, and we all called him X, and it was just like the coolest thing. It was like, here comes X, I don't know. We were in middle school at the time, or junior high, as we used to say. But yeah, it was really cool. But yours is a little bit funnier there.
And it's funny because most people actually do call me X. My wife, you're welcome to call me X. That's what a lot of people do call me. So that's interesting that you had that experience.
Yes, most definitely. He was very, very cool. Well, let's get into your journey. And we have here taking a look at you're a man of faith, and you have a book that you've brought to the attention of us all. It's What I Want My Children to Know Before I Die. And this came out last May. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yes, it did.
And what led you to write What I Want My Children to Know Before I Die?
Deirdre, it is a great question. Thank you for asking me. Let me tell you a story from years ago. Years ago, I used to like to draw trees when I was very young. And I would draw the tree, and I'd draw every little branch, every little twig on the tree. I'd even draw the little veins in the leaves. And so you can imagine, I take a lot of time drawing these trees. Later, I went to school and I saw how the other children drew trees. And you might guess a lot of children just drew them with two lines and a little poofy cloud on top. When I saw how the other children drew trees, I stopped drawing them the way I used to, and I started drawing them the way the other children did.
Oh, no.
And Deirdre, when my mom saw this, she cried. She really cried. Well, fast forward a few years, I was at a Little League game. And by the way, there's a few ways you can play Little League. You can either be good and actually hit the ball. If you were pathetic like I was, you just hold the bat out and the ball would hit and it would drop. It's called a bunt. I had one bunt the entire season as an 8-year-old boy. So I was pathetic. But I'm not here to tell you how pathetic I was. After this one particular game, we got home, and my mom complained of a very severe headache. And this wasn't typical for her. She didn't get headaches. She wasn't the kind that it wasn't typical for her to have headaches at all. She said it was really, really bad. And my dad became concerned, and he said, I'm going to take mom to the hospital.
Right.
And I remember standing there in the front room of our home there. And I gave my mom a hug. And I said, I love you, Mom.
Yeah.
And it was shortly thereafter they drove away.
Right.
Well, I was a little bit anxious about this. This hadn't happened before. And I went to my uncle, who just happened to be stopping by for a visit. And so I went to him and I said, is my mom going to die? And he
Oh,
said, "No,
goodness.
she's not gonna die." And I said, "Do you promise my mom's not gonna die?" And he said,
Mm,
"I promise she's not gonna die. She probably just has a migraine. She's gonna be okay. Just relax." I
mhm.
wanted to believe him. I went downstairs. I climbed up on my bunk bed, and it was getting late, so I tried to stay up. And so I opened a book and read a book. Still remember the book. It was a book about squirrels.
Oh, wow.
Well, I waited for my parents to get home, and I waited, and they didn't get home.
Mhm.
And the next morning, I climbed off my bunk bed, wanted to see my parents, and I went to the door of the room. And there, outside of this room, there was kind of a long family room. I opened the door, and I was anxious to see my parents. I looked out this door, and on the other side of the family room, I could see my dad there.
Mm.
But something was different. My mom was not there.
Mhm,
Instead,
mhm.
instead there was a neighbor and another neighbor and a friend and another neighbor and a friend and another neighbor. It seemed like half the neighborhood was at our house.
Oh,
And as I walked closer, I could see that my dad had been crying.
oh my
He had tears
goodness.
on his cheeks.
Mm,
And as I got even closer, Deirdre, my dad, he was trying not to cry, but he gathered
mhm, mhm,
gathered children together, all
mhm,
of us, all seven of
mhm.
us actually,
It was seven of you, wow.
seven of us. And he said words that I'll never forget.
Mm.
He said, "I think our mom is going to leave us."
Oh my
And
god.
I went into a panic, and I kind of put two and two together. And I said, "Dad, we got to do something. We got to do something. What can we do? What can we do?" Deirdre, my mom had suffered a cerebral hemorrhage, which means a blood vessel in her brain had burst. And she was now brain dead at the
Oh,
hospital,
Lord,
being kept
mercy.
alive by a life support system.
Right, right.
Well, we went down to the hospital. I remember walking in, I saw my mom lying on a hospital bed. She had tubes coming out of her nose. She couldn't breathe on her own because she was being kept alive by a respirator. That was a kind of a
Mhm,
machine that helps you breathe.
mhm, mhm.
And I got to tell you, I was scared.
No, I know you were.
My mom was only 32 years old.
Oh my
I
goodness.
was 8 years old when this happened. It came
Oh,
time for my mom to be unplugged from the machine. There was nothing they could do. And I remember when they unplugged my mom,
right, right.
that she, as the life left her body completely, she kind of crinkled up. She turned kind of bluish. And I wanted to give her a kiss, but I was afraid to because she didn't look like my mom. So I went and I faked one and I walked out.
Oh,
Well, I got to tell you, there was a friend of the family who was a doctor who was in the room there, and he said, "You know what? After you, he let us know after I left the room that my mom on her own went from being kind of crinkled up to where she spread out her arms on her own with nobody helping her, almost like she was coming into a beautiful place." But
oh,
I've got to tell you, I got to tell you
wow.
something.
Yeah, oh my goodness. Oh my
My
goodness. Oh, wow.
my
Oh.
mom died. My mom died that day, and as an 8 year
Mm,
old boy, I watched her die. Now,
mhm,
here's my question for you. Here's my question for your viewers, your listeners
mhm.
today. How do you think I draw trees now?
Oh, you went back to your original. You
You're
had
exactly
to.
right.
You had
And and
to.
and I've got to tell you right now, Deirdre, right now, in this very moment, I'm sharing my heart with you. I'm sharing my heart with your listeners,
Mhm,
figuratively in this
mhm,
very moment. And I feel tingles as I say this. I'm drawing
mhm.
trees figuratively the way I see them right now by sharing my heart with you and your listeners.
Yes,
I want you to know
yes,
life is shorter than you think sometimes.
yes,
And there
yes.
are things that are so important. You know, our businesses or our jobs, they're important. But the legacy we leave for those we love, for our children, I know because I have this unique kind of perspective of things my mom
Mhm,
said to me that took
mhm.
5 seconds in a hallway. She'll say something, And I remember it to this day, decades later, and it has a profound effect on me and my children. So I felt like I needed to write a book to my children. I felt like
Mhm.
I needed to tell them things that are important. You know, my mom,
Mhm.
she did keep a journal, and I treasure those journals. I wish I had even
Wow.
more of her thinking, and I thought, I'm gonna give my kids more of my thinking. So when I pass away, they'll be able to know what I thought.
Right, exactly, exactly. Well, that is a heartbreaking but bittersweet story because I agree with you 100%. People don't realize that life is much shorter than you think. I remember I had an uncle. He's so far, to my knowledge, so far has been our longest living relative. He lived to 96 years old. And I was real young, I was in my 20s, full of myself when he passed away. So I didn't have time or the reflection, or I thought I didn't have the time to go see him and really write down some of his stories or anything like that. But he passed away, and thank goodness I have older siblings that really saw him as a slightly younger person, and so the stories come through them. But, you know, even though he lived to be 96, it still wasn't long enough, in some ways for you to get all your stuff out or what you think you're going to try to get out, you know.
Mhm.
And so it's just very important to share your story with your family and with your children. And you're so correct. I can literally hear words of wisdom, words of aggravation, words of whatever from maybe my father, my mother, dear aunts that I had that have passed on. And you're right, you remember them, and they live with you, and you do pass on these thoughts, these feelings, and everything to your children. But why not make it more solid? And as you say this, let me just go ahead and speak this. Um, Mine is different than yours, but I am actually working on a similar type of thing, but not my personal story, with this type of wisdom that you need to be shared with your family. And so you said there were 7 of you. Were you the youngest when this all happened?
Second oldest. In fact, my youngest
You were
brother
the second oldest? Oh my
my my
goodness.
my my youngest brother was only 7 weeks old. He was still breastfeeding, actually,
Oh
and
my goodness.
so I was, my dad was now, a widower with 7 children, um, but it was one of those moments where it was probably the hardest moment of my life, at least to that point, and,
Mhm.
it changed things. But the thing that's interesting is sometimes our pain eventually becomes our superpower. And what I'm trying to say is, yes, that was extremely painful as an 8-year-old boy to experience that. But I'm in this unique position to tell parents what an amazing effect they have on their children. Like, I can actually say with authority, you may not think your little things you do are huge, but I can tell you they make a lasting effect. And I can see it because I had my mom with me pretty much constantly, as most kids do, obviously
Right,
a little
right,
time you're at school or things like that. But she
right.
was with me. And then when she was gone, there are moments just knowing that she wanted me to draw trees, for example, the way I see them
Yes,
affects me
yes,
to right in this moment. I'm going to share my heart with you,
yes,
even though it's kind of vulnerable, because that's the way I see it. And I'm
yes,
drawing trees right now. And I want to draw trees figuratively by sharing how important it is to be a good parent. And
yes.
and it doesn't mean you have to be perfect. We make mistakes all the time. I mean, trust
Exactly,
me, I make plenty of
exactly,
mistakes. But just
exactly.
just realizing that your little choices have a big effect, and that's one of the things that I discussed in the book that I want my children to know. There's many things, but that's one of the things that got me started to write this book. So great question, Deirdre.
Yes, wow, it's wonderful that you had this thought pattern. Um, and it's funny, my household, and I had a wonderful household, I had a wonderful childhood, but our family wasn't big on hugging. And it wasn't until I got to college And sometimes my friends' parents would come swinging by and they would take us out to dinner and stuff like that. And I'd hang out with some other people's parents and families. And then when they left, they would hug my friend and then they would hug me. And I was like, oh my goodness, this feels so good that these people care enough about me in this short span of time to hug me. And I made up my mind in those college days that whenever I would have children, I would make sure that I hugged them and told them I loved them, if nothing else, to make up for those times that I might have not been a perfect mom. That will hopefully overrule anything that I might have messed up on. Was the fact that I told them I love them sincerely, looking in their eyes. And then I also like them. I tell my kids that I do like them and I do love them, and giving them hugs. So yeah, definitely, I feel like if nothing else, whether you have $5 in your pocketbook or $5 million in your pocketbook, you know, your children won't remember poverty as much if you love them and guide them in a certain way.
I love that. And one of the things that occurred to me when you said that is that you, as a parent, you're becoming Mahatma Gandhi said something. He said, "We must be the change we wish to see in the world." And here
Yes,
you saw your friends getting hugged, and you've experienced being hugged. And you thought, "Wow, I'm going to do this," and so you changed and decided, "I'm going to hug," even though I didn't come from a family that did hugs.
that's
And just
right.
that little change, I can tell you, you're right. What's better than a good hug? And I really appreciate it. We try to do that in sometimes we'll give hugs in the morning after we have a little family time together. And
Yes.
sometimes my kids want to just give me a quick hug. I say, "Get over here and give me a real hug." And not just that real, a good, a good
Oh, that
hug.
side hug. The side hug.
Right.
Don't be offended when they turn tweens and it's the side hug.
Right. Right.
That will come. It'll just last for a couple of years and then you can go back to regular hugging.
Right. I like that.
Well, let's cover. Tell us a little bit about um, a couple of chapters in your book.
Yeah, and you cut out just a little bit. So I'm assuming you said to tell us a little bit about the chapters in the book. Is that correct?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, just like a couple of chapters that you might want to point out.
Well, one of the things is almost what you've been talking about here. One of the chapters I talked about. I know someone named well, I know someone named Daniel, and
Mhm.
Daniel was um, well, let me just tell you a little story here, and it
Okay,
sounds
go
like
ahead.
it's about money, but it's really not. So let me just tell you
Okay.
this: Daniel was accepted to Stanford's MBA program,
Oh, wow.
and which is kind of a big deal. Back when I researched
Mhm.
this, and I'm sure the numbers are different now, I found out that the average Stanford MBA makes about $285,000 in year 5 of their career. So after they graduate, 5 years later, they're making about 285. When I looked this up, the average American household was making about 55,000, which is a difference of 30,000. Well, let's just assume that your career goes for another 30 years. Um,
Right.
30 years times 230,000 is
Mhm.
$6.9 million. Now,
Mhm.
that's really simple math, and it doesn't reflect reality.
Right.
But so what I'm saying is there's a good chance that Daniel, because he went to Stanford, would make $6.9 million more than the next person, which that number is actually low because the math I just gave you did not account for inflation or the fact
Right.
that people usually make more money later on. Well, let me just tell you
Right.
something here. I went to Daniel and I said, "Hey, Daniel, what did you do to get accepted to Stanford? I'm just curious.
Mhm.
Like, what did you do? How did you do it?"
Right.
And his answer kind of surprised me. He said something like this. He said, "My dad taught me that if I didn't understand something, I just needed to look it up." He really instilled this, like, don't be content with not knowing, go look it up. I said, "Okay." And I'm thinking to myself, $6.9 million, look it up. What do you mean? Like, tell me more. And he said, "Well, most of the time it would be happening while I was reading a book. I'd read a book, I'd run into a word that I didn't understand,
Yes.
and
Yes.
I'd have to go look it up in the dictionary."
Right.
Um, he was almost looking stuff up in the dictionary. And I said, "Okay, tell me more. And he said, well, I'd go look it up in the dictionary, and I'd come back, and because I'd taken just a minute or two or three to look it up, I now understood that word. And so I understood the assignment a little bit better. But he said the real magic happened later, because I'd hear that exact same word on TV, or I'd hear it on the radio, or somebody was in conversation, having this conversation, and I'd understand what they were talking about, where if I hadn't have taken a minute or two, I wouldn't have understood. So it's kind of the slow growth where I'd start understanding concepts that I wouldn't if I didn't look it up. And I thought, well, that makes sense. But I'm still thinking to myself, $6.9 million, look stuff up in the dictionary. And so I'm like, Daniel, was there anything else you did? And he kind of looked at me funny, like, well, I mean, sometimes I had to look stuff up in the encyclopedia. I mean, that was it, right? Like, in Daniel's mind, that was it. Well, this story kind of sat with me for years. I went back to Daniel years later, and I said, hey, Daniel, how much time a day did you spend looking stuff up in the dictionary? And he said, it wasn't that long. It wasn't that long, 5, 10, 15 minutes. It wasn't that long. I said, well, what was it on a bad day? He goes, maybe a half an hour. I mean, it wasn't very long. Well, I took worst case scenario, and I said, let's pretend every day was a bad day from the time he was in kindergarten all the way till he graduated from college. So in first grade, second grade, third grade, fourth grade, fifth grade, all the way through junior high or middle school, all the way through high school, all the way through college, including summers, including holidays. And I put 30 minutes a day, and I divided it into $6.9 million. Do you have any idea what the potential, like what Daniel could have been earning as a third grader looking stuff up in the dictionary per hour?
Oh my God. This is mind-boggling.
I won't tell you the math right here, but my calculations, if I did it right, I calculate that as a third grader, he was making close to $2,200 an hour looking stuff up in the dictionary. So now nobody was writing him a check saying, hey, okay, you just looked something up. Here's a check for $2,200. But the reason I tell this story isn't because of the money. It's because of how our little decisions, what we think are just little tiny daily decisions. Like if I told you, or I told the viewers here, if you don't understand a word, you should look it up. And people would say, well, that's probably true. That makes sense. But they don't realize how much sense it could make. And so I want my children to know, little things that you think don't matter. Like, I'm going to get up on time. I'm going to exercise. I mean, just doing something like 15 minutes of exercise might add a decade to your life. It might make it so you don't get some chronic disease. Looking stuff up in the dictionary for Daniel made this big deal. Just let me give you another example. Like doing what you said, giving your children a hug regularly. Just that simple thing, that they know that mom loves them, and they get hugged regularly.
Yes.
I mean, that sounds like maybe an insignificant thing. That might save a troubled teen from suicide. It might save a marriage. Just like, I'm going to catch my spouse, I'm going to compliment him 3 times a day or something about something they did right, instead of being, negative all the time. Little things like that have a huge difference. So I didn't tell the story about money. I just used it because we could kind of use numbers to illustrate it. But nobody would think that looking stuff up in the dictionary could pay you $2,200 an hour. But in Daniel's situation, I think it may.
Yes. Correct. I mean, I agree with that train of thought. Wow. That's definitely, and that goes back to something I was looking at video last week. That's consistency, and consistency compounds. And so with all of that, it can't but help to have an effect, because it's going to compound itself.
I got tingles when you said that, Deirdre. I mean, I did. That was, as you said that, you're exactly right. If you just do 2% better than you did yesterday, and you keep doing that, soon you're many, 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 many times ahead of where you would have been.
Most definitely. And we should all start, and again, just to repeat what you said, I don't think a lot of people, they don't think of life that way. They don't think about their daily journey that way, just doing a little bit better, a little bit more every day. Now I'm going to tell you something, and I know this is kind of sidetracking, but I'm going to tell you something that I discovered I'm today years old, which I will not be saying what that is, but I'm old enough to know that if you get up earlier, you can get more done.
Right, right. Absolutely. There's not a lot you can't get done if you don't get up just a little bit earlier. That's one of those things
Exactly.
that makes a
Exactly.
huge difference.
Yes, yes, yes. Now, after your mother passed away, and fast forward your life, we see and we know that you're a man of God, a man of faith. So, did your mother's, as we will say, human wise, premature death have an effect on you and your journey with Christ?
Well, let me just tell you this. I believe in Jesus Christ with all my heart. And
Yes, sir.
my mom's faith obviously helped out.
Hmm.
She was also a believer in Jesus Christ. And
Hmm.
that is something that is helped stayed with me. And
Hmm.
it's something that's
Hmm.
been very important to me.
Yes.
Um,
Yes.
and because of Jesus Christ, I have faith and knowledge that I'll see my mom again, you know,
Most
and,
definitely.
and I am so grateful for that. So
Yes.
great
Yes.
question, Deirdre.
Well, I think of when I have seen relatives pass away. I have literally been present when three people have passed away, and two of them being my parents. I think about all those times as a child, and I would be so scared when they would talk like this. And they would say, when I leave this world, they would say something like that, or when I go see Jesus, and they would, say something like that. And I'm like, oh gosh, that is just so scary and depressing, or whatever have you. Why are they saying this? I said, I was young. It would frighten me. But one thing that as I got older, and people passed away, that I surely knew is that Jesus is what they lived for. And so I was assured, although sad, although in grief, I knew that they were going to go live with Jesus. That's what they lived for, you know? And so, and if you've ever seen a person who is deceased, that's not your person anymore. Once the breath goes out of your body, the real person is gone. The
It's
person
there,
that you
there,
loved is gone.
we are definitely not just our body. That's for sure. Right.
That's most
The real
assuredly
person
so.
is not there. That's absolutely
Most
right.
assuredly so. And I want to touch base on something that you said earlier. And I know this is sort of getting a little bit off track, but maybe somebody can get something from this as well. That, we're not here. A lot of people are like, why am I here? We're not here. I look at people that put so much into a career. Don't get me wrong. Here on this earth, we have to work. We have to work. And I guess why not while we're here? If you want to be excellent at work, as if you were doing work for Christ, if that's excellence, then and that leads you to a higher position or more money or whatever. Well, go ahead and do it. I'm a driven person. I've got several businesses, and I just like the drive of doing these things. But I know one thing, that I'm not here for that stuff. I enjoy it, I do it, but my mind is focused on my eternal, and I'm not bragging on myself, but I keep myself, I tap into myself and say, these material things, they can all go to pot. If Jesus comes and says, let's go, I'm out,
Right.
so I'm focused on, be focused on what is eternal.
I got to tell you something. When you said this, that reminded me. I was actually watching Denzel Washington give a speech. It was a recorded speech on YouTube. He was giving a speech to some university students, and he said something that he said, you're never going to see a U-Haul following a hearse. Keep that in
No,
mind, because you're not going to take anything of this with you. You the richest people in the world 100 years ago didn't take a penny with them, nothing. And so
nothing.
and here's the other thing that I wanted my children to think about when you say this. There's a couple things. Do you really care now, what if your great great grandparents were popular or not? Do you know what I'm
Right.
saying?
Right.
Does that matter to you if they
Right.
were popular? And here's the
Right.
thing, our great great grandchildren probably aren't going to care if we were popular or not, or we had the coolest, whatever it is, because whatever we think is cool now, I guarantee won't be cool to them. Do you know what I'm
No,
saying? So they're
absolutely
going to
not.
cool, I do care though. I'll tell you this though. I do care what kind of a parent they are, because
Right.
really a lot of that may have been a lot of what my mom had or what her mom had, or even her mom may have been passed down for a long time through generations. And so there are probably some of my ancestors that are affecting me profoundly in ways I don't even understand.
Yes.
But whether or
Yes.
not they were,
Yeah.
had a cool horse or, whatever it is that, that doesn't matter. And
No,
so I
not
really
at all.
appreciate when I watched that. Gosh, Denzel Washington, such a great orator. I loved
Yeah.
listening to him. And he was telling us, he said, put Christ first.
Right.
You're never going to see a U-Haul behind a hearse. And he gave a phenomenal speech. It was really moving. Really was grateful to hear Denzel say that.
Yes. Yes. I think I've seen him, heard him say that, myself, and so you have a free 5-step parent guide, correct?
Oh, sure. Yeah, you could find that on my website if you wanted. It was trying to. People are welcome to go to my website at EksAyn. I have this funny first name, EksAyn.com, but I do.
Yes, 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 yes. So people can certainly go
Should be
there
able to get that.
to find that guide. And you also have a podcast yourself.
I do. I have a podcast called the Principal Podcast that examines, principles that. One of the things I wanted just briefly my children to know is that, real briefly here, gravity. Gravity is a scientific principle. I'll use gravity because it's easy to, gravity works where I'm at. It works where you're at. It works on the other side of the planet.
Right,
Gravity is everywhere. I mean, it even works out in space.
right,
So it keeps the moon going around the earth going around the sun. Millions of miles away, there's clusters of
correct.
galaxies held together by gravity. Now, the reason I'm talking about this isn't because I really want to get into gravity, but when you come in contact with a principle like gravity, you have a couple choices. You can either respect it and align with it, or you can
Right.
ignore it to your peril. Now, let me tell you what I mean by this. I was in Vail, Colorado, and in Vail, Colorado, a lot of that town is built up around ski resorts. Well,
Right,
what happens when people get to Vail? They ride up the lift,
right.
and they actually get to ski down a slope in a beautiful area, pulled down by gravity. So the
Gravity,
people in Vail,
yes.
Colorado, if we're talking money, we'll just use money. They've actually respected gravity, aligned with it, built ski resorts, and they make millions of dollars using gravity to their advantage. Now,
Yes.
they're aligning with it. And there's
Right,
other ways you can align with gravity. I mean, you could do a skydiving company, you could do bungee jumping, you could do
right,
roller coasters, you could do, all kinds of things you could do with gravity.
right,
But if you're careless with gravity, you could hike along and you could fall off a cliff and get injured. You might even die, right? And
right,
so gravity doesn't change. Gravity's just there. It's everywhere we know of. I mean, even millions of miles away in space, it's just there. You can respect it and build a ski resort or a hydroelectric dam or something, or you could be injured by it.
right,
Gravity itself doesn't change. The only thing
right,
that changes is did you know the principle and align with it or not? So
right.
one of the things that I examine when we're talking about principles control our consequences.
Yes.
So I can get to the edge of the cliff and I can say, I believe I can fly, and I can jump
Right.
off and really believe I can fly. But what actually happens when I jump off? Gravity takes over, right? And
Right,
so if principles control our consequences, what
right,
are they?
right,
And they're not the latest fad. They're not the latest book. They're not the latest coaching program. They're actually timeless, kind of like gravity. Things
right,
like
right,
the golden rule,
right.
things like
10 Commandments.
humility, right? 10 Commandments.
Right.
These are principles that you can
Mhm.
align with them or you can ignore them. And if you
Right.
align with them, you have good consequences. And if you ignore them, you have bad consequences. And that's just kind of the way it is.
Correct. Correct. So well said. So well said. Oh, wow. Well, so that ought to want to make you tune into his podcast. But head over to www.EksAyn.com, correct?
That's right. EksAyn. It's a little hard to spell. EksAyn.com. By the way, it was really easy to get that name because there's almost no competition for it.
You don't have to find anybody. Well,
Yeah.
listen, we'll certainly have that correct spelling in the podcast show notes, as well as the video description box on YouTube. EksAyn, thank you so much for adding some words of wisdom to the podcast today.
Deirdre, you're a great host. Thank you for your very insightful questions. You're doing a great thing. Thank you for the honor of being on your show today.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you.